America and Europe by Richard M. Weaver. Has America vulgarized Europe, or has Europe corrupted America? There is no answer to this question, for each has in its own way yielded to the same corrosive impulse. Europe long ago began the expenditure of its great inheritance of medieval forms, so that Burke, in the late 18th century, was sharply aware that the unbought grace of life was disappearing. America is responsible for the vulgarization of the Old World only in the sense that, like a forcing house, it brought the impulses to fruition sooner. It enjoys the dubious honor of a foremost place in the procession. Today, over the entire world, there are dangerous signs that culture, as such, is marked for attack, because its formal requirements stand in the way of expression of the natural man. Many cannot conceive why form should be allowed to impede the expression of honest hearts. The reason lies in one of the limitations imposed upon man. Unformed expression is ever tending toward ignorance. Good intention is primary, but it is not enough. That is the lesson of the experiment of Romanticism. The member of a culture, on the other hand, purposefully avoids the relationship of immediacy. He wants the object somehow depicted and fictionalized, or, as Schopenhauer expressed it, he wants not the thing but the idea of the thing. He is embarrassed when this is taken out of its context of proper sentiments and presented bare, for he feels that this is a reintrusion of that world which his whole conscious effort has sought to banish. Forms and conventions are the ladder of ascent, and hence the speechlessness of the man of culture when he beholds the barbarian tearing aside some veil which is half adornment, half concealment. He understands what is being done, but he cannot convey the understanding because he cannot convey the idea of sacrilege. His cries of abeste profani are not heard by those who, in the exhilaration of breaking some restraint, feel that they are extending the boundaries of power or of knowledge. Every group regarding itself as emancipated is convinced that its predecessors were fearful of reality. It looks upon euphemisms and all the veils of decency with which things were previously draped as obstructions, which it, with superior wisdom and praiseworthy courage, will now strip away. Imagination and indirection it identifies with obscurantism. The immediate is the enemy of freedom. One can see this in even a brief lapse of time, how the man of today looks with derision upon the prohibitions of the 1890s, and supposes that the violations of them has been without penalty. He would suffer poignant disillusion had he a clear enough pattern in his soul to be able to measure differences. But one consequence of this debauchery, as we shall see, is that man loses discrimination. For when these veils are stripped aside, we find no reality behind them, or, at best, we find a reality of such commonplaceness that we would willingly undo our little act of brashness. Those will realize, who are capable of reflection, that the reality which excites us is an idea, of which the indirection, the veiling, the withholding is part. It is our various supposals about a matter which give it meaning, and not some intrinsic property which can be seized in the bare-handed fashion of the barbarian. In a wonderfully prescient passage, Burke foretold the results of such positivism when it was first unleashed by the French Revolution. All the pleasing illusions which made power gentle and obedience liberal, which harmonized the different shades of life, and which, by a bland assimilation, incorporated into politics the sentiments which beautify and soften private society, are to be dissolved by this new conquering empire of light and reason. All the decent drapery of life is to be rudely torn off. All the superadded ideas, furnished from the wardrobe of a moral imagination, which the heart owns and the understanding ratifies, is necessary to cover the defects of our naked, shivering nature, and to raise it to dignity in our own estimation, are to be exploded as ridiculous, absurd, and antiquated fashion. Barbarism and Philistinism cannot see that knowledge of material reality is a knowledge of death. The desire to get ever closer to the source of physical sensation. This is the downward pull which puts an end to ideational life. No education is worthy of the name which fails to make the point that the world is best understood from a certain distance, or that the most elementary understanding requires a degree of abstraction. To insist on less is to merge ourselves with the exterior reality or to capitulate to the endless induction of empiricism. Our age provides many examples of the ravages of immediacy, the clearest of which is the failure of the modern mind to recognize obscenity. This failure is not connected with the decay of Puritanism. The word is employed here in its original sense to describe that which should be enacted off stage because it is unfit for public exhibition. Such actions, it must be emphasized, may have no relation to gross animal functions. They include intense suffering and humiliation, which the Greeks, with habitual perspicacity and humanity, banned from their theater. The Elizabethans, on the other hand, with their robust allusions to the animal conditions of man's existence, were nonetheless not obscene. It is all in the way one touches this subject. This failure of the concept of obscenity has been concurrent with the rise of the institution of publicity, which, ever seeking to widen its field in accordance with the canon of progress, makes a virtue of desecration. In the 19th century, this change came visibly over the world, bringing expressions of concern from people who had been brought up in the tradition of proper sentiment. Propriety, like other old-fashioned anchorages, was abandoned because it inhibited something. Proud of its shamelessness, the new journalism served up in swaggering style matter which heretofore had been veiled in decent taciturnity. It was natural that so true an apostle of culture as Matthew Arnold should have sensed the mortal enemy in this. After a tour of the United States in 1888, he recorded his conviction that, if one were searching for the best means to efface and kill in a whole nation the discipline of self-respect, the feeling for what is elevated, he could do no better than to take the American newspapers. Is this why, 200 years before, a governor of Virginia had thanked God to the scandal of succeeding generations that there was not a newspaper in the colony? Have we here another example of the evil discerned most clearly on its first appearance? What he beheld in germ has grown so immensely that today we have media of publicity which actually specialize in the kind of obscenity which the cultivated, not the prurient, find repugnant, and which the wisest of the ancients forbade. In any case, it has been left to the world of science and rationalism to make a business of purveying of the private and the offensive. Picture magazines and tabloid newspapers place before the millions scenes and facts which violate every definition of humanity. How common is it today to see upon the front page of some organ destined for 100,000 homes the agonized face of a child run over in the street, the dying expression of a woman crushed by a subway train, tableau of execution, scenes of intense private grief. These are the obscenities. The rise of sensational journalism everywhere testifies to man's loss of points of reference, to his determination to enjoy the forbidden in the name of freedom. All reserve is being sacrificed to titillation. The extremes of passion and suffering are served up to enliven the breakfast table or to lighten the boredom of an evening at home. The area of privacy has been abandoned because the definition of person has been lost. There is no longer a standard by which to judge what belongs to the individual man. Behind the offense lies the repudiation of sentiment in favor of immediacy. These are arguments founded upon insidious plausibility which seem to vindicate this publicizing. It is contended that such material is the raw stuff of life, and that it is the duty of organs of public information to leave no one deceived about the real nature of the world. The assertion that this is the real world begs the most important question of all. The raw stuff of life is precisely what the civilized man desires to have refined or presented in a humane framework for which sentiment alone can afford the support. The sensations purveyed by the press are admittedly for the demos, which is careless of understanding but avid of thrills. We shall have occasion to observe in many connections that one of the great conspiracies against philosophy and civilization, a conspiracy immensely aided by technology, is just this substitution of sensation for reflection. The machine cannot be a respecter of sentiment, and it was no accident that the great parade of obscenity followed hard upon the technification of our world. It is inevitable that the decay of sentiment should be accompanied by a deterioration of human relationships, both those of the family and those of friendly association, because the passion for immediacy concentrates upon the presently advantageous. After all, there is nothing but sentiment to bind us to the very old or to the very young. Burke saw this point when he said that those who have no concern for their ancestors will, by simple application of the same rule, have none for their descendants. The decision of modern man to live in the here and now is reflected in the neglect of aging parents, whom proper sentiment once kept in positions of honor and authority. There was a time when the elder generation was cherished because it represented the past. Now it is avoided and thrust out of sight for the same reason. Children are liabilities. As man becomes more immersed in time and material gratifications, belief in the continuum of race fades, and not all the tinkering of sociologists can put homes together again. It is sometimes said, when this point is brought up, that urban living renders relationships of the older kind impossible. There can be little doubt of the truth of the proposition, but the very fact that it is put forward as apologia is an evidence of perversity. For motive is the decisive thing, and had our view of the world remained just, congested urban living, harmful in many other ways too, would not have become the pattern. The objectification in sticks and stones of our conception of living can hardly be pleaded as cause of that conception. When people set the highest value on relationships to one another, it does not take them long to find material accommodations for these. One is dealing here, as at every other point, with our estimate of the good life. In Megalopolis, the sentiment of friendship wastes away. Friends become, in the vulgarism of modern speech, pals, who may be defined as persons whom your work compels you to associate with, or, on a still more debased level, persons who will allow you to use them to your advantage. The meeting of minds, the sympathy between personalities which all cultured communities have regarded as part of the good life, demand too much sentiment for a world of machines and a false egalitarianism. And one detects even a faint suspicion that friendship, because it rests upon selection, is undemocratic. It is this type of mentality which will study with perfect naivete a work on how to win friends and influence people. To one brought up in a society spiritually fused, what I shall call the metaphysical community, the idea of a campaign to win friends must be incomprehensible. Friends are attracted by one's personality, if it is of the right sort, and any conscious attempt is inseparable from guile. The art of manipulating personalities obviously presumes a disrespect for personality. Only in a splintered community where the spirit is starved to the point of atrophy could such an imposture flourish. When the primordial sentiments of a people weaken, there invariably follows a decline of belief in the hero. To see the significance of this, we must realize that the hero can never be a relativist. Consider for a moment the traditional soldier, not one of the automatons that comprise modern armies, as hero. It may at first seem paradoxical to say that he is of all members of the laity farthest removed from pragmatism, yet his is an absolute calling. Give him prudential motives, and he at once turns into a Falstaff. His service is to causes which are formulated as ideals, and these he is taught to hold above property and life, as ceremonies of military consecration make plain. One sees this truth well exemplified in the extreme formalization of the soldier's conduct, a formalization which is carried into the chaos of battle. A well-drilled army moving into action is an imposition of maximum order upon maximum disorder. Thus, the historical soldier is, by genus, not the blind, unreasoning agent of destruction, which some contemporary writers make him out to be. He is rather the defender of the ultima ratio, the last protector of reason. Any undertaking that entails sacrifice of life has implications of transcendence, and the preference of death to other forms of defeat, to the fate worse than death, is, on the secular level, the highest example of dedication. There seems little doubt that the ancient solidarity of priest and soldier, a solidarity becoming impossible today, now that mechanized mass warfare has removed soldiering from the realm of ethical significance, rests upon this foundation. In addition, the disappearance of the heroic ideal is always accompanied by the growth of commercialism. There is a cause and effect relation here, for the man of commerce is by the nature of things a relativist. His mind is constantly on the fluctuating values of the marketplace, and there is no surer way for him to fail than to dogmatize and moralize about things. Business and sentiment do not mix, is an adage of utmost importance. It explains the tendency of all organic societies to exclude the trader from positions of influence and prestige. It accounts, I am sure, for Plato's strictures on retail merchants in the Laws. The empirical character of British philosophy cannot be unrelated to the commercial habit of a great trading nation. Some form of sentiment deriving from our orientation toward the world lies at the base of all congeniality. Vanishing, it leaves cities and nations mere empirical communities, which are but people living together in one place, without friendship or common understanding, and without capacity, when the test comes, to pull together for survival. On the other side is the metaphysical community, suffused with a common feeling about the world, which enables all vocations to meet without embarrassment and to enjoy the strength that comes of common tendency. Our plea, then, must be to have back our metaphysical dream, that we may save ourselves from the sins of sentimentality and brutality.